You are tuned in to Creativity on Tap podcast. Creativity on Tap is a series of conversations produced by COMPAS about the value and importance of creativity. This year, COMPAS turns 50. That's a half century of putting creativity in the hands of millions of Minnesotans. We are working really hard to ensure we'll be doing this for 50 more years. Creativity on Tap is part of Creativity Saves the World, a year-long initiative led by COMPAS to explore the role creativity can and must play in solving the unique challenges of this era. For more information about COMPAS and how creativity saves the world, please visit compass.org. That's COMPAS.org. Our guest today is Sarah McNally. She is the Director of Talent for Endeavor Air, a wholly owned subsidiary of Delta Airlines. Sarah is responsible for talent acquisition, talent development, and organizational effectiveness. Prior to joining Endeavor Air in 2021, Sarah spent 13 years helping companies create cultures where people want to go to work as an external organization consultant. Welcome, Sarah McNally. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, Frank.
It is
Nice to meet
wonderful.
you.
Yes, it is nice to meet you as well. I always love the fact that Sam picks guests that I'm not overly familiar with, so we can be very organic.
I love it. I think that is great.
Yes, and thank you for joining us and taking time out on your Friday morning.
My pleasure.
We'll get started right away, jump right into it. First question I have to ask you is, where are you from?
Um, well, I have been in Minnesota most of my life, but my life began in actually England. I was born in England. My dad's English, my mom's Australian, and shortly after I was born, we moved back to Australia. So I grew up in Australia till I was 7. And then we immigrated here. My dad got a position with an organization in Minnesota. And then I actually went back to Australia for a couple of years, and then we settled back here when I was 10. So I've been in Minnesota since I was 10 years old.
Okay, do you mind me asking what part of England were you born in? I've been there a couple times, and so I'm just curious.
Yes, no, I was born in Windsor. So I like to say, I got a little bit of royalty. I was born, I could see, I guess my mother could see the castle from her hospital room. So yes, I
So
feel
you were just born to be in charge.
born to be in charge, born to be fancy.
Yes, so I did my background research, and you have been what I call the HWIC for a lot of organizations, head woman in charge for a lot of
Very
organizations.
good.
Yes, for a long time. And so let's talk a little bit as we get started about, how you got here. Tell us a little bit about your life's journey. How did you end up in this place where we are now interviewing you about creativity for Compass?
Well, I think Compass turned 50 this year. I turned 50 this year. So, if I were to, and I think probably most of us would say, if we were to ask ourselves, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, when we began our careers, you will end up doing this. For a lot of us, we would say, no way, and I began with, really, in college, I was a theater major. Mainly that was because it was the most fun I could have. I had, I had aspirations, but not to be like a movie star or anything like that. What happened after college was the first job I got was with Disney on Ice, which was super random. I actually followed a boyfriend on the road, and I ended up becoming a tour coordinator. I was not a skater. I need to really clarify that. I cannot skate, but I became a tour coordinator. So a role on the ice show that handled logistics and was an HR function. But what that role did for me was it gave me the perspective of the business side of performance and entertainment, which I realized I liked even more than performing. I understood that that's where the power was, the decision making was, the strategy was. And so that helped inform really the next decisions around my career. I would say in my 20s, I was really figuring stuff out. I was figuring life out. A lot of life was happening to me. My mom passed away, things like that. So I was growing up and figuring out how to adult. And it was in my early 30s that I actually got a job with Pixel Farm, which is how I met Sam Masalia. And I was a project manager. We were an interactive communications company or agency. And that was an opportunity for me to be involved in content in a way where we didn't have the language of digital at that time. This was like 2006, but really we were beginning to look at content and work with content digitally. We did a lot of e-learning and business simulation gaming as well as part of that company. And the other parallel side of my life, my dad, he had always been a motivational speaker and an author my whole life. And so I had grown up in the space of leadership development, watching him speak at conferences, really being child labor, helping sell his books in the back of a room at his speeches. So when I was working at Pixel Farm, I would go as the project manager to conferences as we would be having our clients work through these gaming solutions. And I was watching how audiences were interacting with content in a really different way. And so I'd go home and call my dad and say, oh my gosh, there's so many cool things you could do with all your intellectual property. And it ended up being an opportunity for my dad and I to start talking about what could we do together? Was there something we could create together? And in 2008, we launched a consulting firm called Transform Corporation, where we leveraged all of his intellectual property, everything he had written about over the years around leadership, and built a consultancy around it where we could impact more people and really impact organizations. I did that for 13 years. And, in so many ways, I feel like I got my MBA in business. And I knew nothing about starting a business. I had not been in that world before professionally. So I learned about consulting. I learned about org effectiveness. I learned about organizational structures and design and realized I love that stuff. And so when the pandemic hit, it was an opportunity for my dad and I to become father-daughter again, which was really important. And for me to say, well, what's next? I was 47. So what was the next step in my career? And I loved working with the airline. So that was fantastic. And I wanted to get a job with the airline. I was working, Delta was a client of mine. And the stars aligned, and in 2021, an opportunity came up at Endeavor, which is owned by Delta, but based here in Minneapolis. So I didn't have to relocate, and it was the perfect role for me at the time. It was the senior manager of learning and development. So, someone said to me at one time, your career's like a jungle gym. And I said, that's right, it is. It really is like a jungle gym. And I think that's maybe some of the most fun ways to experience a career.
Well, that is quite a journey. And much like maybe an artist starts a painting, it kind of, you started with one layer and then all of a sudden it became something else and then it became something else.
Yeah.
And yeah, and talking to you, like, I just discovered we have a lot in common.
Really?
We're both 50 because 1973 was the greatest year in the history of all births. And so,
See, I'm 74. So
oh,
I'm a January 3rd birthday of this year. So we're right.
yeah, you're close enough to 73. You're still cool adjacent.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
um, uh, we both started kind of in theater and in performance. And I think, well, let me ask you this. Do you think that the fact that you were in and around theater and having fun, as you say, being a theater major, do you think that that process of being around art and things kind of taking their own life, as you very well know, with theater, maybe helped your open-mindedness or helped kind of your help shape your personality toward, well, let's go over here. We weren't initially going to go down this road, but that road looks kind of cool. Let's go see what that road's all about.
Absolutely. I can now think about, and I have to help my dad make these connections. Like my theater major, it was of value because there's so many aspects of it, understanding people as you inhabit a role and a character. You need to understand people, the way that you play to an audience and then even read an audience in the work that I ended up doing, where I facilitate, I speak, all of those things, has really helped me be effective in the ability to meet an audience where they're at, understand, like, are they understanding what I'm saying? Do I need to shift the way that I'm talking about something? My whole purpose and passion is to really connect with people and have them feel that they matter. And so all of that experience of being comfortable on stage, being comfortable in digesting content and thinking about, here's what I need to relay to an audience, what's the most effective and relevant way to do that? And then just that ability, the improv in life, that you get to yes and pivot. Two things can exist at the same time. All of those things have been incredibly helpful for me, and I didn't even realize it.
Yeah, and you talked about your dad having a public speaking background. That's another way in which we find common ground. My father was a professor at the University of Minnesota, and he did a lot of lecturing on holistic health, yoga, meditation. My father read tarot. He was a basketball player.
Oh.
Yeah, and so he used to take me when I was a child to his speaking engagements because it was Saturday morning and I was 8 and dad had to go, so I had to go too. Um,
Yeah.
so I can absolutely tell that you've been around comfortability with public speaking. As someone who teaches spoken word poetry to students, I try to tell them that you don't know where life is going to take you, but if you have public speaking skills, you can go almost anywhere, and you're evidence of that. So I did watch one of your speeches, you were on YouTube, because thank God for YouTube. Um, as I was learning more or a little bit about you, and you said a couple things that really stood out to me. They're conversations that I've actually had in my household a number of times. You said your gifts and talents combined with your expertise is what give you your purpose.
Yeah.
And I just found that to be so profound because so many people, I don't think, ever acknowledge or recognize, as you said, you're born with gifts and talents, and that is kind of the creative in you at birth, right? And so I just want to ask you, like, what other roles besides what we've kind of discussed do you find that creativity plays or has played in your life, and where you see it show up in the work that you do, maybe outside of just the communication with people aspect?
Yeah. I think, the way I answer it is two ways. One is one of the things, and my dad has taught me so much. So much of what I understand about life and what I even still teach, one of them is how we create a vision. So you just talked about how I talked about purpose. Well, the other part of what we talk about is our brand essence. It's what's inside us that drives us, is what's our vision for our life. And one of the ways that we talk about that is we are all creators, and we're creating all the time, whether we are aware of that or not. Like we're creating this moment right now. I'm creating whatever experience I have with my husband, my daughter tonight, like I know we're going to play a board game, and, but we're creating experiences all the time. And so that in and of itself is, I think, an exciting way to create in life. And so when we think about what we want to create for ourselves, what vision do we have for our life? And that creation process is like, go big or go home. Like, what are the experiences we want to have? And then what are the steps that we take to create those experiences? So that's one way, that creativity shows up for me every day, because I love thinking about experiences I want to have. And you can probably relate to this. We, in our society, too many people are waiting for life to live life.
Yes.
And
Yes.
people, we have no guarantee how long we have. And so life is right now. So I'm not waiting for retirement. That'll be great, when that happens. But what do I want to experience right now? The other thing, how creativity shows up for me, I have a sister who's an artist, and she is amazing. And sometimes that's what we think about from a creative perspective, that creative people are artists. They, make music, they make art, they write. but I create a lot of content. I create a lot of content for people in my organization around leadership. I design a meeting, like how do I want this meeting to flow? And that's creative, thinking about the people in the room, what kind of communication styles are they? How do I shape my message in the most effective way? How do I draw people out? That's all creativity. That's all thinking about solution in out of the box thinking. It's all creativity. I mean, I'm trying to think of what wouldn't be considered a creative process.
Right, right. I tell my students that we live on a rhythm of art. We live on a beat of art. Our heartbeat beats in rhythm. It's
Mm.
on a syncopated rhythm. If your heartbeat is out of rhythm, a doctor will literally put in a device to keep your heart in rhythm. And if it's way out of rhythm, they're going to send volts of electricity through you in order to get your heart beating back on rhythm. And I feel like if people understood that we are all creatives and that's our human bond and our human connection, then we can be that bolt, that jolt of electricity for someone else in a moment's instance when their life heartbeat is out of rhythm. Just need to remind people that we're all on a musical scale. We're all in rhythm, right? And so here's some love, here's some affection, here's some creative thought that I'm just gonna, I'm gonna telepathically send your way so that you can get back in the rhythm of life and existence. And so I agree with you. Everything we do is creative. We don't just think about what we want to eat. We think about what it's going to look like, what it's going to taste like, what it's going to smell like, what it's going to sound like when we chew it. We are thinking in an artistic lens with everything that we do. And so I love the way you put that. I'm listening to you talking. I'm like, man, I wish my students were all zoomed into this because I tell them all the time, look, go big or go home. Like just go big and see how free that allows you to be when you just go big. And so you're saying things, and I'm like, oh my goodness, where's my kids? Where's my eighth graders? Where's my wife? Where are the people that I know live kind of in a box, whether it's because they're young or whether it's because, like you said, they've placed themselves in this box of fear of experiencing and just being free. And you speak so freely. It's such a joy to listen to you. Let's move into a little bit, it's perfect segue actually, into your area of expertise, which to me it seems like you have many of them, but let's specifically go into business expertise. And business culture means different things to different people. From your perspective, what is business culture?
Well, the culture of a business, simply the way that I put it, and it's not my language, you could Google this, it's the sum total of the beliefs and attitudes that exist within an organization. So when you unpack that, so you think about, so if we talk about culture, what kind of culture we want to have, and so often organizations haven't completely articulated the culture, which in a way is okay because culture shouldn't be put in a box. Like our culture is these values, although having that clarity is helpful. But the other part of that is when you think about if we feel like we have misalignment in our culture or we something isn't working, we're not having good experiences, our employees aren't having good experiences, then looking at culture from what are the attitudes and beliefs that exist is really important. So if we're talking from a talent acquisition perspective, from an employer brand perspective, this is what it's going to feel like to work here, and it doesn't, then we really have to look at that. But that's what culture is. And so the work around creating a culture that does feel aligned for people and does feel reflective of the promises that we've made when we've hired them, leaders are making as they're leading, is to look at what are those processes and systems that either support the culture that we're talking about or actually detract from what we're talking about. I don't know if I answered your question, but
Yes, you absolutely did. And it kind of answered my next few questions all in answering that question. Um, so from your perspective, why does business culture matter? And then how does it kind of elevate or, for lack of a better term, destroy a business?
Well, I think about this all the time because this is my job here at Endeavor is the first time I've actually worked inside a corporate environment. I've had lots of jobs, but they've been in smaller companies. I mean, Disney on Ice isn't a small company. It's owned by Feld Entertainment, which is a large corporation, but my experience was on a show, so it was I didn't have the corporate experience. So now being inside a corporate environment, one of the most shocking things to me was how much people work.
Yeah.
I remember asking, so what are the typical hours? And they said 8 to 5. I'm like, oh my God, 8 to 5. That's like your entire day. And I had been on my own for so long where I absolutely worked 40, 50-hour weeks, but I structured my day in a way which actually was reflective of my energy levels. Like I don't have the same energy level between 8 and 5. I'm a morning person, so I'm up at 5 a.m. That is when I am the most creative. 2 o'clock, forget it. Between 2 and 5, I am fairly useless. So that's when I try to actually have meetings because I'm energized by people. So I try to structure my day this way. So my point is, why culture is so important is because I think the stat is we spend 64% of our lives at work. I mean, more than half of our life at work in a traditional environment. So if I'm going to spend this much time here, I want to come to work.
Right.
And it's an organization's responsibility to create cultures and environments where people want to come to work, where they feel safe, where they feel psychologically safe, where they can grow and expand, where they can belong, because why would we do it any other way? So that's why culture is so important, because of how much time people spend here.
I think that makes perfect sense because everybody doesn't operate the same way as you laid out. And I know a lot of people that either are miserable because they spend all their time at work. And then also there's the redundancies of kind of going to the same place, doing the same thing. I think one of the benefits of COVID is it forced employers and corporations to change how they look at what is productive for their workplace and not be so much in a control model, but a productivity model. I know for me, I went back to school during COVID. I could have never done that if we weren't doing distance learning. And for me, I'm the opposite of you. Between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., I can get anything done,
Wow.
but I'm not very productive in between like 8 and noon, right? And that's the way that I work. And so when I went back to school, almost all of my papers, I would start at 10 p.m. They were due at 11:59 that same night, but I could knock them out in an hour and a half and be
Yeah.
done with it. If I
Yeah.
set up to start this paper in the morning, I'd still start at 10 p.m. It's just the way my brain operates.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, knowing how people function, right, within being the most productive is a big part of building productive work culture, would you say?
100%. Oh my gosh. I mean, and honestly, I think we have much greater awareness around that, but we have a long way to go in some of these bigger, more traditional organizations to figure out how to honor those different work styles.
Yeah, I agree. Well, hopefully we'll get there because you being from, England and Australia and probably knowing quite a bit about how European models of work, right? Having been over there, I'm like, people just don't seem like they're in a rush to get back in the wheel, and yet they're still productive.
Yeah,
Here that pace is so, strangulating on people's energy because of the constant hustle and bustle, gotta go, gotta go, gotta get ahead, gotta get ahead, gotta get ahead. Um,
absolutely.
so let me ask you, what is your greatest success in helping a business improve its culture? Maybe think of like, when do you feel like this was the best job I did at helping either transform or elevate? And what were the outcomes ultimately that make you feel like this was my apex job?
Yeah. Well, I could definitely highlight some projects and clients that I had over the 13 years of working at Transform, and I can do that. And I want to say my role here at Endeavor is my favorite yet.
Okay.
I feel so lucky, and I truly do. I think part of it is I did I did this a little bit different than other people did it, especially like in the pandemic. There was a lot of people that left corporate jobs to go out on their own.
Mhm.
And I flipped it. I was on my own consulting and then decided I want to go internal. And not that other people don't do that, but that's very much reflective of the way that, I just have my career has just been different in that way. I feel so lucky that I had all that experience externally. And it's probably partly even my age that I was really ready to be a part of a team. Like I really, really wanted to be part of a team. And I wanted to be part of an organization where I could see projects all the way through and actually still be with the team. So as a consultant, I would work on these cool projects, but then I would leave, and then they were the team, and I would begin to feel like part of their team, but I wasn't part of their team. So
Right.
I love what I get to do here. One of the coolest things I've done so far here is in the airline industry, you have the different operational groups, and one of the operational groups is called tech ops. And tech ops are technical operations. So it's all of the mechanics and the engineers. So on the mechanics that work on the airplanes, and the engineers that work in the systems. And at Endeavor, our tech ops organization is really strong. And when I came on board as the senior leader of learning and development, what's great about Endeavor is there's a real hunger for learning. So everyone was like, coming out of the pandemic, when are we going to get back to training and leadership development? And I thought, wow, that's so awesome that I don't have to sell here at all.
Right.
People want this. With the tech ops group, one of the things that I noticed, and again, coming from my background, was in them asking for leadership development. One of the first questions I always asked was, well, tell me why. Tell me more about why you want leadership development. Because it's important to determine, does someone just need to check a box like, yep, I sent my leaders through leadership development, or are they really seeking change?
Right.
Because if you're seeking change, putting someone through a leadership development class is not going to get you there. It's part of creating transformation and that change, but it can't be the only thing. So I was able to see here in our tech operations this, first of all, this huge desire and commitment to their leadership, but it wasn't just about this one group of leaders. It actually was a lack of clarity around what does it mean to lead in tech ops.
Mm.
And so I proposed to the senior leadership team for tech ops that we do training as a part of a broader initiative, but let's begin with getting clarity around what does it mean to lead at tech ops. And that can't come from me and my team. It actually has to come from you. You tell us what it means, because that will have much more impact if it's your language versus human resource language.
Yes.
So they trusted me to kick off an initiative where we asked for volunteers from the tech operations, the leadership, who would participate on a core team, and they were representatives of the leaders that we would impact. And we spent a year with this group clarifying and defining what are the most important leadership roles between 11 different leadership positions in that operation. And now we're in the phase 2 of this, where now we're starting to do the leadership training.
Mhm.
But it's been so awesome because the engagement that we got had so much to do with the fact that we actually were working with leaders in tech ops, and it wasn't HR driving it. It was a tech ops leadership initiative enabled by human resources. They're in a big group, so there's about 1,200 of them. So, but what we're seeing is people are starting to adopt the language. They're starting to talk about it. We're in it for the long haul. This is a multi-year initiative. There is no, when it comes to leadership alignment. There's no end sight, there's no
Right.
finish line. You continue to develop. So I'm really proud of that work. And I feel really proud to be part of an organization that fully adopted it. And so much so that the other operational groups now have been like, we want to do it too.
Nice.
So that's so cool. That's a great metric ROI.
And it seems like you applied kind of your philosophy of read the room, right, to that situation and said, well, reading the room, let's empower those that have the need or have the desire to kind of create the program that they feel will be most effective for them, and then let's help them facilitate that, and let's collaborate on that facilitation.
Exactly.
That's that theater piece, right? That's that,
Yeah,
especially working behind the scenes. That's that, how do we make sure that the people that are going to be doing the work have a say in what the work is and how the work gets done, and then let's all work together to make them happy, which then makes everybody happy.
totally. Yeah.
Yes, awesome, awesome. So we're not all successful all the time in life, as much as we all want to hit a home run every time up at bat. Can you think of some times where you've had failures? And also, I'll add to that, how do you define what a failure is in business or in kind of leadership? And have you had some along the way?
Yes. Many, many, much. Failure. I mean, so I'll share a story. My experience with Transform, the company that I had with my dad, was fantastic in so many ways and some of the toughest times of my life. And working with my dad wasn't always easy. I love him to death. He's one of my best friends, but it wasn't always easy. I have 4 siblings, and I say to them, Dad and I have such a good relationship because we basically went through therapy for 13 years, to try to figure out our stuff.
Yes.
Oh, in 2017, we had the best year yet in our business, and I was getting ready to take over the business. And in all transparency, I wasn't sure that I really wanted to do that, but I felt a deep obligation and responsibility to do it. And so in 2018, I became the CEO on LinkedIn, basically. So LinkedIn said I was the CEO of Transform. I didn't feel any different, which is why I say it that way. And so 2017, we had this stellar year. 2018, like January 1, LinkedIn says I'm the CEO. January 4, one of my best friends dies. January 8, I'm out in LA with Delta, and we had probably 3/4 of our revenue came from Delta and contracts. And January 8th, they tell us that they're pulling all contracts for external vendors, and so 3/4 of our projected revenue just went like that.
Mhm.
So I I went into a bit of a depression that spring, just sorting through what do I do? Can I do this? How do we get over this? Grieving my friend, all these things. And 2018 to 2019 were really tough. It was really tough to kind of revive the business and get it back to where it was. One of the challenges I had was my dad was a very big public figure, big brand, and it was hard for me to get out from behind him. As much as he wanted me to, he would get in the way of that as well. And I say this, and even if he heard this, he and I've talked about this many times. So um, and that was part of the challenge in the dynamic. In 2019, I really thought, I don't think I can do this much longer. Now I'm funding the business with personally,
Right.
and so I'm impacting my family because of that. And one of the things I discovered in my quest, all I could see on, social media was hashtag living my best life,
Yes.
hashtag gratitude, and I thought, who are these people? You know, I'm
Right.
still not hashtagging living my best life. And I found this group. Can I swear on this?
I look,
I
my
won't
dad
swear.
was a failure. So
I won't swear. So I found this group as I was Googling, like, who's failing like me? Like
right,
these are my search terms. I
right.
found this group called F up nights.
Yes.
So, and I was like, what is this? And it was this global organization where it was kind of like TED Talks, where people would get up and talk about how they effed up their
Right.
failures in business. And I
Right.
thought, holy, I found my people. I found my people who are talking about failure. So much so that like I emailed and I couldn't see that there was a Twin Cities chapter. So I was like, I am starting the Twin Cities chapter. And I got an email back saying, oh, you should connect with this person. They've already, signed up to start up Twin Cities. I connected with them and I became the MC for F Up Nights for the Twin Cities for the next 2 years. But it was what I wanted to do was celebrate our failures
Yeah.
and in this way and talk about it in a way that we don't talk about enough in this culture of Instagram and filters, that it is so important for us to fail.
Mm.
And it brings me back to in my 20s when I was going through some tough times. I read this book. I can't think of the author, but he's a philosophist. And it said something about when in our darkest times is when we ask ourselves the deepest questions.
Mm.
And I thought that's exactly right. Like we don't ask those types of questions when when we're up on the peak, everything's going well. When we're in the valleys is when we have these deep, reflective, transformative questions that are critical to us getting to the next stage. Um, so again, I've answered your question in a lot of different ways, and I could share like an explicit example, but that's my perspective on
Right.
failure.
No, I appreciate that. I love the way you answer the question. It made me think about how personal experiences, things, life happens to all of us. And I think we've all been there where, some things happen or a series of events happen all at the same time, or all in a short window of time. And then we're in our darkest nights and we're all kind of going, okay. And, I like to quote the great philosopher Tupac Shakur when he says,
Nice.
after our darkest nights always comes the brightest day,
Mm.
and that's, I think, for me, I know that's been my life. I went through a series of, my best friend in my early 20s, like at the worst time. My dad kicked me out of the house, my best friend got murdered,
Yeah.
and and then I had my first child was on the way from a woman that I didn't know well enough to be having a child with. And all of this happened in like a 3 month space at 22 years old. And I'm like, where did I fail? I was the prodigal son. I was the black kid that went to college and had these expectations because my parents were educated, but I didn't want to do anything that they were doing. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I know I didn't want to be a father and mourning and homeless all at the same time. And
Totally.
it's how I found spoken word poetry. It's ultimately what led me to walk in the doors of what led me to what I do to this day. And so I think tapping into that part of us that is always willing to zig when everybody else zags. You talked about, when everybody was kind of like, I need to start my own business. It's COVID. And everybody's going one direction and you're like, no, I think I'm going to go be an employee,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that is that creative mindset that doesn't look at where the trends are going, but in our kind of darkness says, okay, how can I art my way out of this? How can I create my way into a happy space? And you creatively were like, okay, where's the failure people? And I'm thinking, why didn't I know about this when my band fell apart? We were doing great and we came back from a West Coast tour and then everybody was like, I can't do this anymore. And I'm like, I failed because like, you talked about working with Disney on Ice and being in the business side. That sapped my creativity because I was the everything for the band, but I learned what it's like to book 23 shows in 29 days in
Yeah.
cities and, you know, on the other side of the country. And that was like, and then I also had to be on stage, at least you didn't have to then go skate, you know,
Right. Right. Right.
but
Yeah. Exactly.
I could relate to those experiences and how they developed us. Enough about me. We're here to talk about
Well, and, but Frank, I just want to, if I could piggyback on what you're saying, because I love the way you're shaping this conversation, obviously around creativity. And I'm really transparent about so much of my life, and all of the things that we've gone through. It adds all of that flavor and that interest
Yes.
to life, and that's what being human is all about. And I
Yes.
talk very candidly. Again, we have this in common. I got pregnant at 21. I was at an all girls Catholic school. I was the oldest child. I did everything right, and then I find myself pregnant. It's a much bigger story, but I ended up making an adoption plan for my daughter. I talk about that very openly, and I volunteer for a nonprofit in Minneapolis called the Brand Lab. And one time I was sharing that story with the students, and one of the young Black boys said to me, "I would have never thought you had that backstory." And I thought, wow, they're looking at me as this, white woman of privilege who doesn't have a backstory. And I was like, oh, that's the tip of the that's barely the tip of the iceberg of my backstory. The amount of things that I've done. And I said, you will never meet someone who doesn't have a backstory. We all have our stories, and I think we should celebrate that more. I think we should celebrate our humanity more, because that's what helps us relate to one another. There's no one who doesn't have a backstory, and people who try to, have this perfect image, it's so boring. I just
Yeah.
think
No, I agree. And so I did hear you tell that story when I was watching you on YouTube. And I was your daughter. I was my biological mother put me up for adoption when I was born. She
gosh.
so I was adopted into this amazing family. And she came back into my life. It's a really long story, but she came back into my life when I was 16. My father actually ended up being her financial aid advisor at the University of Minnesota. And although her and her father had put together this plan, she had no idea that her financial aid advisor was raising the child that she gave birth to. He
No.
just told her, yes, he just told her, if you ever want to find your child, because he was also a counselor. So she shared her story with him. And he said, well, if you ever want to find your child, come find me and I will help you. And so when I was 16, she found my father again and reached out to him and said she was ready. And so he had been raising me, this whole time. And so he said, okay, I'll help you. And then he came and said, how would you feel about meeting the woman that gave birth to you? And I went and talked to my mom first. And then my mom said, and my mother was adopted. So my mom said, well, if I ever had the chance to meet my birth parents, I absolutely would want to. So you have my blessing. And so that's how I met my biological mother. She came back into my life. And so, but I tell the students that I work with, um, to get to what you were just talking about, I say, in order for me to get you to write a spoken word poem and perform it for your classmates in a week, we have to develop a bond and connection of trust. So here's my story. And I tell them, by the time I was 4, I had been adopted. My parents had gotten divorced. I tell them at 21, my best friend was murdered. At 22, I had a child with a woman that I had known for longer than 6 months. And I never wanted to be an educator ever. And I tell them, I said, but I was called. This was my calling to be here with you because my life experiences brought me here. And that's how I get students to write in a week, because I share my backstory and all of its failures or all of its life happened to me experiences. And they go, oh, wow, you were adopted. Oh, wow, your parents got divorced. Oh, wow, you made bad choices. Yeah. I
Yeah.
was a yes, I was an eighth grader once too.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, I didn't turn in all of my assignments, and that's how we connect with people. We share the way that we have creatively moved through life and problem solved or overcome darkness or depression or sadness, and to lead us to why we're in front of whomever we're speaking to in that moment. So yeah, when you were sharing your story, I was like, man, why do I not know this woman? And now I know you.
Yeah. Wow. Gosh, I could talk to you for a long time, Frank.
Well, likewise, I was like, this is my spirit animal here when I was listening to you speak, and I was like, and she's such a great speaker. And so, yeah, and we both do similar work in terms of addressing audiences and knowing how to read the room. For me, it's What poems do I need to perform to reach out and touch this audience as I analyze them coming into this room to
Yeah.
hear today? And
Yeah.
listening to you talk, it's the same thing. What delivery mechanism do I need to use out of my different styles to be most effective for this audience on this day? And that's improvisational and creative thought on the spot, because we don't get a long time to study an audience, right? We get
Yeah.
they walk in.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
So we're kind of answering a lot of the questions in our conversation, which is that organic thing we talked about. I love it. That's the way it should be. Um, so let me ask you this. What do you feel like, based off your work with Endeavor Air, um, do you feel like employees and employers view creativity through different lenses? And when you're talking about talent development, um, what kind of, so this is a two-part question. What kind of creative thought goes into establishing what today's employees need?
Mm. Okay, so the first question around how leaders might view creativity.
Yes, differently from those that, they're, for lack of a better term, in charge of leading.
Yeah. If I think about uh, Endeavor, which I, is probably not dissimilar from other organizations, it makes me think about the previous comments
Right,
around. Often I think people think about creativity is for creating art and music. So when people, like, we're a really operational organization, we get planes in the air, that's what we do. So if I were to say to, like, a leadership team, um, let's talk about how, if I were to talk to a bunch of mechanics or pilots or a flight attendant and say, let's talk about how creatively you do your work, they'd probably be like, well, I don't know how to answer that. So I don't know how leaders here, like overall
mhm,
globally, would think about creativity. What they probably don't, again, connect to is that they're being creative all the time.
right,
Like, for example, the airline industry as a whole, since the pandemic, have been dealing with a pilot shortage. It's not really a pilot shortage, it's a shortage of captains. So a plane has to fly with a captain and a first officer.
right,
So because we had, and every airline is experiencing this, because we let captains retire early in the pandemic, we've been trying to build back up. And
right,
so us as an airline, Endeavor Air, we have to be creative about how do we find, they're called direct entry captains. So pilots who are already qualified as a captain who want to come work for us, so we can immediately put them into the left seat. So we're being creative all the time, but I don't know if our leaders would necessarily connect it to creativity, which is kind of funny because they might say get creative, but they might not think that it was creativity. I don't know if that makes sense.
yeah. I was just going to ask you, I said, have you ever walked into a meeting and said, okay, let's get creative on our approach here, and that word is thrown around but not looked at in the same lens of actually being creative. It's almost like just rhetoric, as opposed to, no, this is really what we're doing. We are creatively problem solving. We're thinking of an approach that maybe we haven't taken in the past, right?
Absolutely. And that is creativity.
Can
So
organizations teach its leaders to be creative? Because that's something that can be taught, or is that something that it's more like, no, let's teach you how to tap into what you already have? How do you view that?
what it makes me think about is we often talk about, from a leadership perspective, that one of the muscles that leaders need to develop is being more strategic than tactical.
Mm,
And I think strategy is creative. Strategy is a different way of thinking about how we're going to get somewhere, the solution. Tactical is, we're tackling the thing right in front of us.
right.
It's very action oriented. So strategy, I think, can be a way of doing leadership speak, but it's really about expanding creativity. So if we were to think more strategically, think more broadly about something, we are looking at something different and more creatively. That's how I would answer that.
That is beautifully put. That's another one I'm going to steal. Strategic more than tactical. That is very well put and very clear in its understanding. That I love that. So as we start to wind down here, and yes, I could talk with you all day. This is just so like this is fun. Right?
Is this
It's
making you
a
a
great
morning
conversation.
person? This is making you a morning person.
Oh no, I'm still gonna want that. But it's definitely making my morning wonderful this morning.
Good.
Yes. If you were speaking to someone who was just starting out their career, what advice would you give them as it relates to organizational culture for a beginner just coming in? For example, what would you tell them about how they can assess the culture of a potential employer, determine if it's a good fit for them? How can they find insights, about themselves that will help them understand workplace environment? Like, how would you suggest to someone sitting over coffee that said, Sarah, can we sit down and meet? I'm thinking about doing this. Can you give me some tidbits on how to approach it?
Yes. I think, what I would say is, I would say, first of all, whatever role you're going into, know that you do not have to stay anywhere. There's nothing that you have to do. So that can bring a little relief, and even, just self-talk, that the pressure's off. Like, this doesn't have to be my world forever and ever and ever. We just don't live in those days anymore. So then I would say one of the greatest muscles we can build is our curiosity muscle. So just being really curious, which helps us depersonalize things. So as if I'm going into an organization and I'm new in my career, a wonderful person said to me a couple of years ago, I'm going into a new role and I'm capturing more stories. And I thought, oh my God, I love that. So all of these experiences that we have, we're just capturing stories. So putting on our curiosity hat and building that muscle. So getting really curious about what does it feel like to work here? How are getting curious and observing, how are decisions made? Who's empowered to make decisions? What does the leadership look like? Um, what does belonging feel like to me, and what do I need in order to feel like I belong? What might be missing, and how could I impact it? What might be missing, but it's outside of my control, but I can depersonalize and then just observe, that again, this is probably not the place I'm going to retire. So what do I like about working here, and
Right.
what would I want to be different? And that'll help inform the next step. But what are all the things I can learn from this job that will help me get to the next step? So I need to provide value. It's a two-way street. Employers aren't looking to just hire anyone. They want to hire people who are going to add value. So how can I add value, which builds my brand, but also have the company work for me? My job is fulfilling my vision. My job is fulfilling my purpose. So I would tell them to come in with that mindset.
Throughout this conversation, I keep hearing you say without saying that part of a zest for life is being open to the possibility of change and not looking at change as a pejorative thing, but looking at change as a beautiful part of the living experience. And that just seems to be your approach to everything. Like, nothing is permanent. So embrace what you're doing in the moment, see what you can add to what you're doing in the moment, kind of make your mental notes about what you're getting out of what you're doing in the moment, and be open to the very realistic possibility that the next moment is going to provide something different. That just seems to be this theme that keeps coming back in this conversation. And I think it's such a beautiful approach to living. I would recommend that anybody listening to this podcast listen to it a second time with your notepad out, right? Because you're just offering such beautiful nuggets. And so thank you. I appreciate it. Um, Let's take a look at a societal lens for a moment. Obviously, we're still trying to recover from whatever that thing was that happened in 2020 and 2021 and how it happened, and not just the pandemic, but kind of the social unrest, the fact that when things happened anywhere, they happened everywhere because everybody was stuck in one space, kind of living vicariously through the interweb. Um, but one thing that hasn't changed is we got to put food on the table. We got to keep the lights on, have to keep a roof overhead. We have to find a way to keep running in the wheel. Um, and we still need social circles, right? We still need that human connection. So, from your perspective, as someone who's been so involved in helping create positive business culture, positive environmental culture for people, social cultures, how do we continue moving forward? How do we keep building organizations, keep building environments, keep building social cultures where we can all thrive as we move toward the future that's different than maybe, I mean, the future is always different, right? But, this very different future, because one thing we can't get rid of is the knowledge that we now have of the experience that we've all gone through. So, from your perspective, how do we go forward, and how does creativity play a role in us moving forward collectively?
Yeah, the way I would answer this is, by far, I am not an expert on this, but if I look at the way that we're talking about it right now at Endeavor, is um, nobody has the answer yet. Nobody quite knows what to do. I think there's the tension of, shoot, the pandemic really did shake some things up, and there's this desire for some to go back to the way that it was.
Yes.
But I think it's really being driven from, because it's hard to think about, how do we transform this? We don't have the answers. And so we weren't asking ourselves, we didn't have to ask the questions before the pandemic. This was just the way that it was. And now we're having to ask ourselves these questions around, how do we create hybrid work environments? What is the best way? There's no one size fits all. And so the way that we're talking about it now is first of all, we're talking about it. We're getting curious about it. We're getting curious about, do we have to have a policy that fits everyone when we have such different work groups in our organization? I mean, we have shift employees, we have 9 to 5 employees, we have employees that work at their desk on a computer, we have employees that fly in airplanes. Like, the employees look so very different. And so, one of the most important things, I think, is to notice when we're making decisions out of fear. And that's not necessarily how we talk in organizations, in the corporate space or the business space. But anytime I think we're making a decision out of fear, it's not going to be the right one. And we have businesses to run. And so that there's all these different tensions, from employees are saying, why can't we have it look like this? Why can't we have it look like this? I need life balance. And we need to pay attention to that and honor it. And we need to run a business, because if the business can't be productive,
Yes.
then you don't have a job anyway. So
Right.
there's always that tension, and so I'm not really, answering it in any type of solution, because I don't think there is one yet. But I think that, people are very smart, and we can figure these things out. And maybe part of it, and this is kind of what we're doing, is try something. Did it work? Try something different. Did it work? That's my answer. That's not actually very eloquent.
No, that's perfect, because what you're really talking about is the creative process, which is mostly trial and error and being amendable to the circumstances of those around you that you work with, or that you work for, or that you try to create with. And it seems to me, as you've already expressed, you really love your work. I'm gonna quote you again as we close this down from something that you said in the video that I watched. You said, happiest people are those that daily contribute their gifts and talents to something they believe in. And without realizing it, that has been my motto. Yeah, because that is exactly what I do and why I'm probably jipper and why they love me on stage Thursday nights, because they're like, but you work 3 jobs a day. But yeah, I taught kids, I coach basketball, and I wrote a poem, and now I'm here speaking to you all. I get paid
Yeah,
for all of it, but none of it's work, you know?
totally. It's awesome.
So I just want to thank you so much for joining us, Sarah. I know you've got to run because you've got real work to do on a Friday. I don't anymore. And so, but this has been such an engaging and amazing conversation. I do hope I get to meet you in person.
That would be
Just
awesome.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. You've been listening to Creativity on Tap. We've been speaking with Sarah McNally, and this has just been an amazing conversation. Sarah is talent coordinator, talent developer, talent acquisition with Endeavor Air, a subsidiary of Delta Airlines. And as you've learned, she is so many more things. Thank you so much, Sarah. Creativity on Tap is conversations produced by COMPAS about the value and importance of creativity. This year, COMPAS turns 50. That's a half century of putting creativity in the hands of millions of Minnesotans, and we're really working hard to ensure we'll be doing this for 50 more. Creativity on Tap is a part of Creativity Saves the World, a year-long initiative led by COMPAS to explore the role creativity can and must play in solving the unique challenges of this era. For more information about COMPAS and how creativity saves the world, please visit COMPAS, COMPAS.org. Sarah, have a wonderful rest of your Friday and weekend and enjoy time with your family. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Frank. It was a pleasure.